the Gitxaala do this dance and song where they're pulling together all this energy that disrupts and distorts. They're pulling it, asking all the people to help. And then they get someone to open the door and they throw all that energy out the door. And really, that's what it was like. I watched that energy leave leave us as a family. And it was incredibly powerful.
Bonjour, Tansi, Anin, everybody. Maingan Inane Indigenous. My name is Marcus Peter Rempel, and it's my privilege and my honor to welcome you once again to the Return of the Buffalo podcast. My friend and co-conspirator Henry McKay isn't with us today. He and probably won't be going forward. He's just gotten busy doing the work, and he's with a drum group today, as far as I know. So blessings to you and your drummers, Henry. I had the pleasure of sitting down virtually, of course, with Patricia June Vickers, who is just an incredible person, an artist, a therapist, a teacher, a survivor of significant trauma herself, daughter of a Methodist missionary teacher who went with some prejudices to an Anglican Indigenous community on the west coast of British Columbia, but opened herself in curiosity and relationship to the people, and really became one of the people, and began a family that Patricia comes out of, and a family that experienced some real significant troubles. This is a trigger warning, folks. Patricia is the survivor of childhood sexual abuse that happened in her family, and so if that's triggering for you, just be warned that's some of the territory we're going to travel together today in her story. But really, we're traveling with someone who has done the work and done the healing, and brings a lot of courage and wisdom and real hope to all of us as it relates to that story, and share some really interesting experiences with cutting edge clinical tools, as well as very traditional methods of healing. And I think I just kept wanting to ask her more and more questions, and finally she said, "I think we're done now." I'm grateful for that rich conversation that we had. So without further ado, here's Patricia June Vickers. Well, good to see you again, and thanks for making time for sitting with me in the Return of the Buffalo podcast here. I'm sorry Henry can't join us. He sends us his best wishes, and I think he's drumming with some guys right now. So he's doing the work. Yeah. Patricia, you actually were for a time I have this correct? You were keeper of the learning circle for a time at Sandy-Saulteaux. Was that the position that you had?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was. Yeah.
And when was that, and how long was that?
That would have been the fall of 2014 to the spring of 2015.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember you coming for some walks on the land here where I'm at Plowshares Community Farm. Erica Young, one of our farm mates, was already working there, and I think she had you over. And yeah, I remember you as a kind of a friendly face, and I knew you were doing something interesting over there. And then you were called away from that position to, do I have this title right? Director of Mental Wellness for the BC First Nations Health Authority?
Yes, I was the clinical director for mental health and wellness for the province. Yes.
Yeah. And so I think Sandy-Saulteaux was sad to see you go, but what really excited for that opportunity for you. And I understand it now, you are about to retire, or you've just retired?
I was 13 months with Skidegate Health Centre working on founding a healing pathway for addressing intergenerational trauma and sexual abuse. So I've moved into consulting and private practice. I've returned to it actually.
I'm curious, just as you look back on what you were able to do with the local health authority. That's an interesting and powerful role. Just what comes to mind as you look back on that?
Well, I'm just thinking before we move along any further, I want to say that I'm currently living on the territory of my great grandfather Amos Collinson, who was Haida, and he had a daughter, Kathleen. He married a Ts'msyen woman from the village of Gitxaala, and Kathleen is my father's mother. And she married Henry Vickers, who was Heiltsuk. So on my father's side, I am Heiltsuk, Ts'msyen, and Haida. Basically, I've said I'm from the village of Gitxaala because my mother, who was an English woman and went to Gitxaala as a teacher, she was trained as a missionary through Prairie Bible Institute, but she went to be the teacher in Gitxaala in the Federal Day School. She was adopted by an Eagle chief, Sm'algyax, and because we're matriarchal, that adoption
Hmm.
happened so that we would
Hmm.
all have a place in Ts'msyen society. So
Hmm.
that's the reason why I've said, even though I'm more Heiltsuk than anything else, that's why I've said I'm from Gitxaala, is because my mother was adopted by that community.
Hmm.
So those are my roots and how I am connected to people in 3 different nations.
Hmm. Well, and I thank you for reminding me of proper protocol and good manners in a conversation such as this. I kind of launched in with probably a more colonial kind of question about your career uh, and you're reminding me of good manners in terms of talking about who our people are and where we come from as a way of beginning a conversation.
And I think this way is a human way, um,
Mm,
and not just in, if we look at First Nations, it's an Indigenous way because we're all Indigenous to some land somewhere.
yeah.
And yes, and also from my mother as a missionary, she brought to me a way of, I think, inquiry more than anything.
Hmm.
Because when she went into Gitxaala, she said she didn't realize she was conditioned to
Hmm.
discriminate. And she said, first of all, to discriminate by seeing the Church of England as inferior to her, I want to say, denominational way of looking at Christ and being in this world. And what she discovered was they weren't inferior at all. She was conditioned to believe that she was going into a village where they were savages, and in the 40s they'd already translated the Common Book of Prayer into Sm'algyax, which is the Ts'msyen language, as well as the hymns. There was an orchestra established, and they were playing it, trained by their own people. And because our people are everywhere, our musical people, we have songs for everything. And so she was really surprised by that, the discipline in the music. She wasn't expecting that either. So I think that she has given me a way to be curious and to inquire, and that I've really just stepped into that in the last 4 years, because complex PTSD has really been a disability for me. And so going through neurofeedback and through excellent counseling methodologies for PTSD, I would say, recovered these parts of my soul, and I'm beginning to find out who I truly am, not who I was told who I am, or not the me that I thought I needed to present to the world to be accepted and respected. So yes.
Well, I want to talk and ask you about some of that journey of healing with PTSD. Maybe before we even get into that, I feel like I should maybe reciprocate the proper manners and just acknowledge my own place where I'm standing and speaking from in this conversation. So my feet touched the earth today at a place called Plowshares Community Farm in a bend of the Broken Head River, the same river that the Sandy-Saulteaux Spiritual Centre is on. And I come from the tribe of the Mennonites. All my grandparents, I think this is true. It might not be true of my grandmother, but I think otherwise they were all born on the steppes of southern Ukraine. And my mom's mother, I think she may have been born just after the family moved to southern Manitoba. And so I come from my own really tribal people who have had a long history of speaking our own language and singing our own songs and teaching our own children according to our own ways in our own communities. And someone who was really an elder who helped me connect with Indigenous communities was a man named Menno Weeb, who I'm remembering especially this year because he passed away earlier this spring, and was someone who connected with significantly with folks up north, all across the country, really through a lot of what was through. He had an activist side. He engaged very seriously with the Lubicon Cree in Alberta and their struggle with the incursions of development there, hydro development here in Manitoba, and the damages there, but also through gardening, and that was the one time in my life I've ever been in British Columbia. I was in Doig River, north of Fort St. John, doing a community gardening project with Daneza people under Menno's supervision. And that was the first time I sat with people in the circle and drummed. That's where I received a drum that I still carry today. The first time I worked on a hide, I think, with folks, was connected with Menno, and that really began a story that continues to this day in terms of finding my way into connections with Indigenous people who are on a healing journey and who are, I think, helping me discover some of the possibilities that we all missed out on when particularly my European ancestors arrived here and didn't listen very well to the wisdom and the good manners that were here, and the ways, the beautiful ways of praying and connecting with spirit, and yeah. So it's one of the things that I think, in your story, it's the connection with an English missionary mother, as part of that story, and really like a deep, like I get the sense of deep integration that is in your story, in terms of your relationship to your mother, your relationship to your father, even the way that, and it's not just your relationship, like there's a whole society that made your mother part of the society, found a place for her in that society, and it sounds like her ability to be curious and open and respectful created some really interesting possibilities. So thanks for sharing a bit of that. Where would you like we could talk about complex PTSD and neural feedback and some of that part of your story, but where would you like to take the conversation from here?
Well, I think maybe a good next place would be how I connected with Sandy-Saulteaux Spiritual Centre.
Mm-hmm.
So I was employed by the United Church as the native minister for BC, and one of the first things I did is, I am from the northern region, and so I began to inquire into the relationship between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. And as well, I was looking at those Indigenous people who were students at Vancouver School of Theology and had mentors. And I wanted to know how that was going. And so I had 4 questions that I asked the Indigenous communities, their congregations, and the non-Indigenous. Same 4 questions. I wrote their answers out on chart paper. And basically, the results were that those who were being mentored didn't have the support that they felt they needed and wanted. And that the village congregations they felt isolated and not a part of the presbytery, the Northern Presbytery. And then the non-Indigenous congregations basically said, well, we don't really have the connection that we used to have with our neighbors. So they were both saying the same thing. And as I was learning this, I was feeling quite angry that there's this presentation that everything is good and fine. And then when you actually get down to the ground and you begin to inquire, you find out that everything's not good and fine. And so what happened was, I was fired, and it was the mainly from what I knew, it was the Indigenous leaders that they had reached a conclusion that I was a troublemaker and I was a bridge burner. And I found out later that they'd made the decision to fire me before they even consulted with the with these churches in the presbytery. They basically had the meeting and they told them that I was fired. And without consulting me, without asking me, without any kind of dialogue or discussion, a decision was made and that was it. And so this impacted because I was going to be working half-time with the BC conference and half-time with Sandy-Saulteaux Spiritual Centre. And then this happened. And so a part of what happens in every system and organization is when someone is labeled, then it's actually slander. Then conclusions are made about this person's character. And when an interview was all set up, things were going to move ahead, and then they canceled it. And so I was talking with Adrian, and I said, this really isn't right. There are conclusions and decisions being made about who I am. There's no dialogue with me whatsoever. I've been fired, and fired wrongfully. And so I wrote a letter to the well, it was Maggie. I can't remember her name, but she was the. I was going to say Hodgson, but it's not Maggie Hodgson. She's involved in another area in Indigenous work. Yeah. But at any rate, so Sandy-Saulteaux Centre, basically they agreed and they hired me. So that was how I came into the center.
Wow.
I know.
You kind of came in under some stormy, stormy weather.
I did. But you know, what I found was that those in the center and Adrian as a leader, they were willing to listen and they were willing to give me feedback. And so for me, that's what the center represents, is a willingness to sit down and work something out. So so I'll always be grateful to Adrian and to the board that they made the decision not to accept the conclusions about who I was. So that's how I stepped into the center with deep gratitude. I was also deeply hurt, and it's taken me some time to learn the lessons from that. You know, for it all just to settle and not to have so I can talk about it without blaming anyone, without anger, without resentment. These are just facts. So, right. Yes. And so then what do we do when we are believers in Christ and believers in the teachings of Christ? When something has not been in line with his teachings, then how do we make it right? Because that's a part of our whole way on the coast, and I think throughout North America. When there's a wrongdoing that's happened, then we have a responsibility. If I'm the one who's done it, I have the responsibility to make it right. And so that happens with fasting, that happens with prayer, that happens with consultation, that happens with my tribe and my tribe's guidance and direction to me. It happens with mentors who aren't about taking sides, are concluding no discrimination, no judgment, no criticism, just following the good teachings.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, I think I'm hearing echoes there that I've heard from other Indigenous people about journeys of forgiveness and right making of relationships. And I think in some ways, the particular package that we brought of the gospel that we brought over from Europe, in some ways, there's been, a tradition that's maybe there's a lot of thoroughness in thinking about the rules of how to be a good person, and then there's this story of grace that's very powerful, but sometimes it's, there's forgiveness is one thing, but like making relationships right, and paying attention to how one rebalances things. There's a kind of thin version of grace that says, oh, we don't have to think about that, like we just forgive and move on, and I think there's a thoroughness and a carefulness in that I've sensed more from Indigenous. It feels like there's a thicker tradition there, almost, in terms of like how do we do the work of making relationships right.
Yes, I think it's the how to. There's protocol and process for sure. And just as you were talking, I was thinking of the Good Samaritan. And so there, it wasn't the Samaritan that injured this person, and it's the Samaritan who helps him. He didn't cause the suffering, but he was there to help the suffering with the suffering. So, so I think of that, and I think of something that's been really powerful in my life, starting in my teen years, was the Holy Eucharist. And that before we're to partake in what I would say something that's magic, it is that we're to admit to ourselves and to God the wrongdoing that we've done, and we don't partake in that sacred sacrament unless we've made things right. Mm-hmm. So it is actually really clear, not only within scriptures, but also within the different denominations around the Holy Eucharist. So we do have clear teachings on how to make it right. It's that it's not practiced.
Yeah. I remember my mother had a story about that, of our people having a particular practice that her mother told her about. The Mennonites wouldn't have communion weekly; they would have it maybe once a year, and making your relationships right was actually a big part of the preparation. And so, what a person, if you and I had some trouble with each other, I would send over to your house. I would send a jar of borscht. And if you sent that jar back empty and clean, then I would know that you and I were okay, and we could do communion together. But if you sent it back full, that meant, oh, Patricia and I have some work to do before we can do communion together. And the community wouldn't celebrate communion basically until everybody could eat everybody's borscht.
Yeah, and that needs to happen more than once a year.
Yeah.
that needs to happen every week, because it's not just the major wrongdoings that we acknowledge. It's also the little ones, like that I got so angry because you did this or you did that.
Right. Yeah.
It's also those that I need to be looking at inside of myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So we're talking about one of the great sacraments of the Christian Church, and its role in right making of relationships and healing. One of the things that's so rich in when I listen to your story is the freedom I sense in you to to move back and forth between a number of traditions and their ways of healing. Clinical ways of healing, traditional Indigenous ceremonial ways of healing. Yeah, in that, like, if we open that door, where would you like to go there?
Well, why don't we start with the family program that you told me about that I'd proposed when I was an employee? I think that'll be,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Yes, yeah. So, so as I understand it, Patricia, the germination really of the doing healing work with families on the land at Sandy-Saulteaux, uh, if I have it right, that conversation began with you, and you kind of instigating that conversation significantly when you were the keeper of the learning circle at Sandy-Saulteaux. I would just love to hear that story.
Okay, what's the name of the program again now? That's
We received the name Return of the Buffalo.
ah
Yeah.
great for the families, healing in the
For the
family.
yeah, yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, which is also significant for me, even though the Sweatlodge and the pipe and well, those two in particular are not our cleansing ways and are not our prayer ways. I've personally adopted them, and it's my oldest brother Roy. I have 4 brothers and 1 sister, and my oldest brother Roy had asked me to join him in the Sweatlodge tradition, which led me into fasting and also
Mm,
teachings of the pipe. So Return of the Buffalo also has significant meaning for me.
mm,
Well, first of all, I want to say, um, just as a two-legged, that healing in the family has been uh, a priority, starting with myself as a mother with 4 children. So back when my daughters were 3 and 7, I found out that my father had been sexually abusing them, and
mm,
I my apologies. I should have, said disclosed that I would be um, speaking to some things that might be upsetting for some of the listeners,
mm,
and to please, hopefully, everyone who is listening, if it does trigger them, they have uh, therapeutic support, like counseling support. Um, so I found out that my father was sexually abusing my daughters, and so um, I learned about the Meadows Treatment Center in Wickenburg, Arizona. And in 1991, just 2 years later, after the disclosure, we we were there as a family. And my children, my oldest son, who's now 41, he was 11 at the time, he confronted me about the ways that I had neglected and abused him as
mm,
a child, and he was magnificent. So I had a great deal of rage um, because I was constantly faced with powerlessness. And as an incest survivor, parenting was extremely difficult for me.
mhm,
When I came to those times of powerlessness, I really didn't have the ability to self-regulate. I didn't know how to do it. And so there were times when I was verbally abusive, and I spanked them. And after I went through treatment, the spanking stopped. And
mm,
but it took a long time to address, uh, more than address, to begin to understand where the rage was rooted. So going through that treatment program with my children, and then just a year later, my brother Roy went through, and during his family week, our parents were there. and all but one sibling. So during the family week, we were all asked, what do you want for healing for your family? And I said, I want all the secrets out. And being a younger one, second to the youngest. And so it was from Monday to Thursday of all of this incest and sexual abuse. And my mother crushed because she was ignorant of everything that was happening in the home. And but by Friday, I remember quite clearly all of this shame energy. The Gitxaala do this dance and song where they're pulling together all this energy that disrupts and distorts. They're pulling it, pulling it, pulling it, pulling it, asking all the people to help. And then they get someone to open the door and they throw all that energy out the door. And really, that's what it was like. I watched that energy leave leave us as a family. And it was incredibly,
a miracle.
It was incredibly powerful. And my oldest brother and I have continued to work on our relationship, and we're very close. We're good friends. And it's happening with my other siblings. It's a slow process, but it is happening. And I'm grateful for that. So with that as part of my history, I said, yes, it's the families really that need the help. I think about all I wanted to know when I was a young mother, and there was no one to teach me. And so I was stuck in this cyclic existence of not knowing how to really, now I would say, to self-regulate, not knowing how to heal from the horrors and the torture that I went through and survived as a child. So that's why I said when I was with Sandy-Saulteaux, you really need to focus on the family, because now I'm a grandmother of 9. And so any chance I have to work with young parents, I want to give to them what I didn't know. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's powerful. I think that the blessing of your own hope and your own courage to do that kind of work in a place like Sandy-Saulteaux, without me even knowing that story, like I can feel the carry through of that into the work that has begun there. And I wonder, I've like Return of the Buffalo still feels like it's very much still under construction, and we've in some ways we've danced with a number of different dance partners, different agencies, different First Nations, different communities, and each dance partner has kind of implied a somewhat different role for us, and I think we're still figuring out, what our place is. The child welfare system is a pretty complex ecosystem. And I've heard you. I'm thinking of some input that you gave to a conversation that was around the architecture of a new building that's being dreamed of at Sandy-Saulteaux, and I've heard you talk about a vision for the kind of work that could be done at a place like Sandy-Saulteaux that could be very special and is maybe not happening in quite the way that is possible maybe anywhere in Canada yet. I'd love for you to describe what you imagine when I've heard you say that sort of thing.
Thank you for that invitation. Here on Haida Gwaii, well, first I want to say that that I lived with dissociative amnesia for most of my life, and I was in therapy with a family member, and that person had disclosed that they'd sexually abused me 10 times more than what I could remember. And I was shocked and went to my physician and said, how could this be? How can I not remember? And he said, you have dissociative amnesia. I'll refer you to a psychiatrist. And that was in 2007. And the psychiatrist did EMDR on me, and I say did it on me because there was no kind of preparatory work that they do now, where because a person splits when there's that much abuse, and so you want to be sure to have all the parts together in a sacred circle, which wasn't done. And so when the memory, for me, it came in pieces, and then there was the whole memory, and I was shocked, and I didn't want to know anymore because it was horrible. And so it took me quite some time. So 20
for folks that don't know what EMDR is, could you just
they work,
give a kind of sketch of the technique? What is that?
Definitely.
What does it stand
they
for?
work
What does it
with
mean?
either the eyes, where you're following now, rather than the hand. They have a bar that has lights that go back and forth, and so it's this eye movement, rapid eye movement that you're doing. Or else, if it doesn't work for your eyes, then it's auditory, and you put on headphones and the sound is going back and forth. It is not hypnosis. What it does is it disrupts the brain's functioning, and all you really need is your with your mind to set the intention to remember, to recall. And so, because there are no filters to the brain through the eyes and the ears, that's why we can be triggered like that, because there aren't the filters through access to the brain through eyes or ears. So that's EMDR, and it was just
and so it helps you remember and then also reprocess in some way the experience. No, just remember.
No, yeah, it's just recalling. So it gives you pieces, and then there's the full memory that you access. So it's about accessing this memory in the brain. That's what you're doing. You're accessing it, because it's all perfectly stored in the brain. But with dissociation, you don't have access to it. I've wanted to remember, and I was unable to remember. So it's about interrupting the brain's functioning. And
I imagine that could be pretty scary to suddenly.
Of course.
The floodgates open.
Well, you have access to facts that that in order to survive, you've been denied access to. So I started with EMDR, and then before Sandy-Saulteaux, very close to a nervous breakdown, because I've been working in this field with Indigenous people for a long time. And I took some time off, and then slowly made my way back. And then a second time in 2017, close to another nervous breakdown. And I knew it was because of dissociative amnesia, and that I really did have to do this healing work. So I was with FNHA, and they supported me on going on short-term disability. And for 2 months with psychologists who were also colleagues, Steve Milstein and Ulrich Lanius, I did the neurofeedback and low emission.
And describe that. What does that mean, neural feedback?
Yeah, low emission neurofeedback system lens is you have one EEG sensor and one reference point. So what happens is a low emission is put through the EEG sensor. And what it does is it's less than your cell phone. It disrupts the brain's functioning. So similar to EMDR, only this is neuro, which is also biofeedback. It's just the brain. So so I went through that, and Ulrich, he did the sacred circle. He said, you have these parts. I said, yes, as a psychotherapist. And the parts are really about these significant times when you were neglected or abused. So if that happened throughout your childhood where you experienced neglect or abuse, then you have all these parts that we'll say in Indigenous terms, where these parts of you have been lost and are stuck in these geographical places. So it's about calling them into the circle and letting them know, I'm going to do this and you're safe. So it was a powerful experience, and I retrieved a great deal of memory. So this neurofeedback, with what the majority of Indigenous people suffer and live with, is really an important method for helping to heal from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And here on Haida Gwaii, I with Ruth Lanius, she's a psychiatrist in Ontario. She supervised me doing a research study. It's alpha down, where it's not like lens where there's an emission into the brain, a low frequency. Instead, you're putting the sensor into this spot on the scalp, which is called PZ, and you're training the
towards
brain.
The back of the head.
Yeah, and you're putting a Muse2 headband on using MindLift, and you have an iPad, you have your own account. And just by playing a game with your brain, not your hands, not touching the iPad, when your brain goes into the alpha waves, which is between 12 and 8 megahertz per second, if it's in that range, then you get points.
Okay, I've heard about this, but I've never sort of seen a picture of it.
Yes. So and the brain, when it's
by thinking in a certain way or getting yourself into a certain state.
No, thinking is the mind.
Or it's not about thinking. It's about
thinking is the mind. This is about the organ of the brain, which was what people were confusing constantly, is between the two. But of course, our thinking does impact our brain functioning. Yeah.
So you learned somehow to get yourself into the state where your brain was generating these alpha waves.
It's training your brain into the alpha waves through rewarding. So rather than discouragement and punishment, it's through reward that the brain's learning. Yeah. So the results were people were sleeping better, they were calmer. In conflict, they were more focused. The results were really amazing. And the risk is that as we relax, then those things that were maybe unconsciously repressing, the memories from childhood, they're going to arise. And so that's the risk. But the other thing that happens is people were remembering beautiful resources from childhood, like going to the stream and picking up all these tadpoles in their hands and feeling what they felt like. And then another memory of being with grandmother when she's come out of the smokehouse and she's giving you a hug and you can smell the smoke that's smoking the fish on her apron. So there were these really wonderful memories as well. And that's the thing about growing up with abuse and terror. They're not only the horrible, horrible things, they're also these miraculous magic things. and they're interwoven in our history, in our life's history. So it's to eventually, I can't remember the word you used, but I think you said reprocessing.
Yeah.
When what we're working towards is integrating. So what does this mean? What does this mean that I suffered this horrible abuse from my grandmother, who mentally and emotionally was abusive to me? What does this mean? And soon people come to realize, well, what did she suffer? People don't just do this. They begin to realize that through conditioning, their brain is learning to relax. So through conditioning, what have I learned? So, we're not using that. We're not yet using neurofeedback. And I think this might be the second neurofeedback study in North America in an Indigenous population. There's also deep brain reorienting, a method that's been developed by psychiatrist Frank Corrigan in the UK. And he's presenting at the Boston Trauma Conference this year on deep brain reorienting. So there are these methods to get to the deeper layers of trauma that we're not pulling together to serve our people yet. And, and that's my interest. Then there's the prison population. There's FASD. There's so many areas where we can begin to connect our people with ceremony, the land-based ceremony, with traditional medicines, teas. You mentioned borscht, these foods that connect us to our grandparents, and maybe some goodness there, or somebody who was good that fed us this food. And so the land and ceremony, and then these neuroscience ways of healing, and our spiritual teachings and practices, our cleansing ways, to bring them all together. I think
all together.
Yeah.
It's I think one of the things that's most exciting to me, and what attracts me to doing work with Indigenous folks, is that there is a kind of a freedom and a conviction that that we don't have to splice and dice the spiritual from the scientific, the traditional from the clinical, et cetera, et cetera. There's more of a sense that everything belongs, and that this fragmentation that is really the result of religious arguments that I think in some ways Europeans tried to arrive at a certain peace with one another by saying we're not going to argue about those things in these places. Like spirituality will be something that people do on Sunday mornings unto themselves, and we'll keep it in those boxes. And medicine will be something else. Psychology will be something else, and we'll kind of keep things tidy by keeping things in separate boxes.
Which is a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
That one's a different discussion.
One question, yeah. Well, one question I have, like in your research study, like who was it, you yourself who was helping people do the work of integrating and meaning making, coming out of the memories that they were gaining greater access to? Like, it seems to me that you need some kind of skilled helper. And I'm interested in your thoughts about how one trains skilled helpers for the kind of work you're talking about.
Well, we do it for ourselves first, don't we? And I think with Creator's help, I do it for myself first, and
Hmm.
not that it's complete. In a sense, it is complete, and in another sense, it's not. So, so it's for myself first, and then it's in relationship with others. So, and I think that's probably the most important thing is knowing I'm a part of a tribe, and it's a tribe of people who believe in magic and who believe that Christ was a master shapeshifter. That
Hmm.
that his teachings are really about being fed by ravens in the wilderness, about walking on water, about pulling the tax owed from the mouth of a fish. I mean,
Hmm.
there are things that
Hmm.
somehow are overlooked, but that this is a part of my heritage only because I believe, you know. Um, so uh, I think that really that everything comes first from Creator, and our interconnectedness comes from Creator, and we are interconnected. That it's a part of our teachings, all of our teachings. And the interconnectedness isn't just between humans, it's between humans because Creator spoke and all that I'm looking at came into being, which means I'm connected with Creator's voice that's in physical form. So our interconnectedness is on a spiritual realm first, and then there's this physical realm where you and I are speaking through this, cyberspace, and you're in a land there that you're connected with, and I'm in a land here that I'm connected with. So we have this, and it's an important part of what it is that we're doing.
Hmm. It's a very rich and like deeply interconnected vision of healing, and I'm trying to think about um, the work we're doing with families these days. Uh, like if we were, I guess we're also talking about these tools, and I'm thinking about like how would if we were going to begin to try to make those opportunities available to families uh, that might spend some time with us at the center, like you know what would that look like? How would we begin to sort of put the building blocks for that kind of possibility into place?
Yeah, well, we always do that starting with cleansing, don't we?
Mm,
And with communion. And we do it by lifting it up to Creator and asking Creator, where do we go? Knowing that
mm,
the pathway is already there. And so I personally, even though I have ideas on how to do that, and I have experience in what works, it's different every place, and we always
mm,
start in that way first, and then we go from there
mm,
through dialogue.
mm. Thank you for that final answer. I think that's like like deferring, like rather than uh, imposing a particular program. What I'm hearing from you is that that your awareness and your trust and your experience of like seeking the path that Creator has for a particular people in a particular place, and doing that with intention and ceremony and deep listening. That's the advice you're giving. You're not saying, here's my certified neurofeedback seminar that I'm going to sell you now. I really appreciate the humility and the wisdom of saying, listen to the Creator for what the Creator is, the path that the Creator has for you where you are. And I think each of our listeners can hear that speaking to their own hearts and their own situation wherever they are. And I think you've just given us a lot of gifts that will land with people wherever they are in different ways, and those seeds will take root in good ways that we can't even predict or manage, and shouldn't even try to. So thank you for that wisdom, for that humility, and for sharing your story with us. I just really appreciate it, and I appreciate the time.
I'd like to end, I know I said it at the beginning, but again, to end by saying thank you, especially to Adrian Jacobs and to the board of Sandy-Saulteaux Centre, and my prayers for blessings on each one and their families, and on each employee, that you'll all be united and your interconnectedness will bring about good fruit.
Thank you for that. That means a lot.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good day.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.